The obese mail-order bride arrived a day too late. The rancher said, "You're right on time for me." In 1882, a woman's worth was measured by her beauty, her bearing, and her ability to bear children. She had come to marry a stranger, only to find his grave still fresh. But the rancher who stood before her didn't offer pity. He tipped his hat, eyes steady as the sun, and said, "Miss, maybe you were late for him, but right on time for me." And that was the day this town learned that grace comes wrapped in the body they mocked. The wind carried dust like judgment as Hannah Campbell stood at the edge of Silver Creek's wooden platform. Her dress, sewn carefully back in Boston, already looked out of place, creased, sweat-stained, a little too tight from the long train ride. The townsfolk lingered behind the store windows, whispering. They'd heard about the mail-order bride whose groom was now a corpse, and they couldn't wait to see what kind of woman crossed half the country for a dead man. Hannah's fingers tightened around the handle of her small trunk. Inside it was her entire life. 2 dresses, a Bible, and a letter with his name. James Blackwell. The man who had promised her a quiet home and honest companionship. The man whose grave she had just seen, marked by a single wooden plank and 3 crooked words, "Taken too soon." Her throat ached as she turned toward the voice that had cut through her silence. He stood near a wagon, tall and dust-covered, hat-shadowing eyes the color of an evening sky. His clothes smelled of leather, hay, and sunburned earth. But his tone wasn't mocking. It was steady, almost kind. "You don't look like you got anyone waiting," he said quietly. "And this town's no place for a woman alone. I can take you to my sister's boarding house till you decide your next move." The words caught her off guard, simple, practical, offered without pity. She looked up, unsure whether to trust him. "Why would you do that for me?" He glanced down at the letter clutched in her hand. "Because James Blackwell was a fool, but he was a friend, and I figure helping his bride is the least a man can do." The street was silent enough to hear the horses shifting behind them. Hannah wanted to say no, to walk back to the train station and vanish eastward. But she had nowhere to go. Her parents were gone, her teaching job gone, her savings gone. The ticket west had been her last chance to belong to someone, somewhere. She swallowed hard and nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan," he said. "Colton Sullivan." He lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing, placed it on his wagon, and offered his hand. Hannah hesitated, then stepped up beside him, the wooden bench creaking under her weight. A few men laughed quietly from the saloon doorway. Colton didn't even glance their way. He flicked the reins, and the wagon rolled forward through the dust. For the first time since Boston, someone's silence felt safe. They rode past the general store, the blacksmiths, and the small church that still smelled of new pine. The town looked half-built, half-broken, like everything in it was waiting for someone to finish the story. When they reached the boarding house, a woman with sharp eyes and rolled-up sleeves stepped onto the porch. "Colt Sullivan, what stray have you brought me this time?" Colton smiled faintly. "A guest, Sarah. Her name's Miss Campbell. She'll need a room." Sarah's gaze softened when she saw Hannah's face. "Oh, honey, come inside. Don't mind the dust. The West's got plenty of that." Inside smelled of bread, soap, and old wood. Hannah sat at the kitchen table, while Sarah poured coffee and talked like someone filling the silence so grief couldn't settle in. "You can stay here as long as you need," she said. "Pay when you can. I don't charge grieving hearts full price." That night, Hannah lay awake staring at the ceiling. Outside, the crickets chirped like tiny clocks counting down her courage. She could hear Colton's boots on the porch below, pacing once before the sound faded. She thought of the way he hadn't flinched at her body, hadn't stared like the men on the platform. He'd looked at her as if she was simply another traveler, lost on the same road. By morning, the whispers had grown louder. Every face she passed in town said the same thing. That's her, the big woman who came too late. She tried to keep her head high as she bought thread and flour from the store, but the merchant's wife giggled behind the counter. "Bless her heart," she whispered. "He probably died just to escape." Hannah forced a smile and walked out with shaking hands. When she returned to the boarding house, Colton was there, speaking with Sarah. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw her. "You all right, Miss Campbell?" Her voice cracked before she could answer. "I will be." He studied her for a long moment, then said, "I've got an idea if you're open to it." She braced herself. "What kind of idea?" "I need help at my ranch. House needs cleaning, books need order." "You look like someone who knows numbers better than gossip." "I can pay fair wages, room and board included." Her first instinct was to refuse. She'd been humiliated enough. But something in his tone wasn't charity. It was respect. A straightforward offer between two people who needed different things but might somehow help each other stand. "What would people say?" she asked quietly. Colton's jaw tightened. "They already talk. Might as well give them something worth the noise." That made her laugh, small, surprised, real. It was the first laugh she'd heard from herself since Boston. By noon, her trunk was back on the wagon, and the two of them were heading out of town. The air smelled of sage and heat. The sun turned the fields into gold. Hannah watched the town shrink behind them and whispered, "Good riddance." Colton glanced sideways at her. "You ever worked a ranch before?" "No," she said. "But I learn fast," he smiled. "That's all a ranch asks." The journey to his land stretched through open plains, where grass moved like an ocean. The mountains shimmered blue on the horizon. Every mile seemed to peel away a layer of fear she hadn't known she carried. When they reached the ranch, she gasped. The main house stood weathered but proud, its porch overlooking acres of grazing land and a small creek that sparkled in the sun. Fences lined the property like careful handwriting. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's work," he replied. "But worth it." He showed her around the barn, the smokehouse, the small room that had belonged to his late mother. The furniture was sturdy, though a film of dust covered everything. "You can stay here," he said. "Door locks from the inside. And don't worry, folks around here know better than to cross me." Something in the way he said it made her believe him. That evening, Hannah cooked for both of them. Simple stew, thick bread, coffee dark as midnight. Colton ate with quiet gratitude, as if he hadn't had a real meal in weeks. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard all day. "Don't let the town bother you," he said. "They don't know strength when they see it." Hannah met his eyes, confused. "Strength? You came across 3 states alone," he said. "That's more than half those men will do in their lives." The words hit her harder than she expected. For a moment she couldn't speak. After dinner she stepped outside. The air was cool, full of crickets and the faint scent of hay. Fireflies blinked above the fields like sparks from an invisible forge. For the first time since she'd arrived in Silver Creek, the world didn't feel like it was shrinking around her. Days turned into weeks. She rose before dawn, swept dust from rooms that hadn't felt a woman's touch in years, and reorganized Colton's messy ledgers by candlelight. She learned to bake with cornmeal, to ride a slow, gentle mare named Belle, and to smile again without flinching. Each evening, Colton returned from the fields with sun-cracked hands and a quiet nod. He never complimented her outright, but he noticed everything: the mended curtains, the fresh flowers in a jar, the way her laughter filled the house. The townsfolk kept their distance, but their curiosity grew. Rumors shifted from pity to suspicion. Was she living there as his wife? His servant? His secret. One afternoon, while Hannah was kneading dough, a group of women rode by in a buggy, pretending to wave while whispering behind gloved hands. She caught a fragment. "Poor thing thinks she belongs." Her chest tightened, but before she could retreat inside, Colton appeared from the barn, wiping sweat from his neck. He looked at the women, then at her, and said loud enough for them to hear, "You making that bread for supper, Hannah? I don't know what I'd do without you around here." The women's faces fell. The buggy moved on. Hannah blinked, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Colton smiled faintly. "Let 'em talk," he said. "They'll tire themselves out eventually." That night, when he left his coffee untouched and stepped out to fix a loose gate, Hannah followed him. The moon was full, lighting the land silver. She stood beside him, the wind lifting her hair. "You don't have to keep defending me," she said. He looked at her, eyes steady and unflinching. "I'm not defending you. I'm reminding them what they missed." Her breath caught. For a second, she forgot the ache of humiliation, the whispers, the years of feeling less. Then, from the hills beyond, a shot rang out. The echo cracked through the night like thunder. Colton froze. "Get inside," he said, voice suddenly sharp. Hannah's heart slammed against her ribs. "What was that?" He didn't answer. He grabbed the rifle from the porch and scanned the darkness. The horses were restless, snorting. Another sound followed, a faint splash near the creek. "Someone's cutting the fence," he muttered. "Stay inside, Hannah," but she didn't move. Something inside her refused to hide this time. Through the moonlight, she saw a shadow moving near the water. 2 men, dark coat. "Quick hands!" They were stealing cattle. Colton stepped forward, gun raised. "Drop it!" he shouted. The thieves ran. He fired once, a warning. They vanished into the trees. When he turned back, Hannah was still standing there, trembling but unbroken. "You could have been killed," he said. Anger and fear tangled in his voice. "I could have been gone 100 times before," she said quietly. "But I'm still here." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Colton lowered the rifle. "You've got more courage than sense." "Maybe," she said. "But courage keeps me alive." He smiled barely. "That it does." They walked back to the house in silence. As the door closed behind them, Hannah felt something new settle between them. Not pity, not charity, but respect. Outside, the night wind carried the sound of the creek, steady and endless. Inside, a single lamp burned on the table, casting 2 shadows that finally looked like they belonged together. The next morning, the sun rose pink over Sullivan's Reach, spilling light across the dew and the burned fence line. Hannah stood on the porch, with her shawl tight around her shoulders, staring at the place where the thieves had been. Smoke still clung faintly to the air, mingled with the scent of wet hay and morning coffee. Colton came out behind her, hat in hand. "They'll be back," he said. "Men like that don't stop when you scare 'em once. They stop when they're broke or buried." Hannah's voice was quiet. "Then we make sure they get neither comfort nor coin." He turned to look at her, surprised at her calm. "You sound like someone who's done this before." "I've lived through worse than thieves," she said. "At least they announce themselves." Something in her tone, solid, unshaken, made him study her in a new way. Not as a woman who needed saving, but as someone who might just keep him alive. By noon, the 2 of them were mending fences side by side. The rhythm of work filled the silence. Hammer strikes, creaking boards, wind through tall grass. Colton spoke little, but every so often his eyes drifted to her, her hands steady on the hammer, her back straight, her face shining with sweat and sun. The woman the town mocked looked more like the spine of the whole place. At supper, he said, "We'll ride into town tomorrow. Need to tell the sheriff what happened." Hannah looked up from the table. "If we do, those men will know we're not afraid." "That's the point," he said. "Fear's what they feed on." She smiled slightly. "Then let's starve them." The next day, they rode together down the dusty road into Silver Creek. The townsfolk paused mid-step to stare again, her dress dusted with trail dirt, his arm resting casually on the reins beside her. A whisper moved through the street like wildfire. "She's still there. She's living with him." At the sheriff's office, the lawman, a heavy-set man with sharp eyes, scribbled notes as Colton spoke. When they finished, he leaned back and sighed. "Pike's men, most likely," he said. "He's been after your water rights for months." Colton's jaw clenched. "He'll have to pry them from my grave." The sheriff nodded slowly. "He just might try." Outside, Hannah asked, "Who is Pike?" "Edmund Pike," Colton said. "Owns half the land east of here. Thinks he deserves the rest. My father once told him no. He's been trying to erase our name ever since." As they passed the saloon, a familiar sneer stopped them. A tall man in a cream vest, clean boots, and a smile too smooth for honesty stood leaning against a post. "Sullivan," he said. "Didn't think you'd be back in town so soon." His eyes slid toward Hannah. "And you brought—" "A company." Colton's shoulders tensed. "She's under my protection," Pike chuckled. "So she's the famous bride? The one who missed her own wedding?" "Shame, you could have done better, Sullivan." Hannah froze. The laughter from the saloon spilled out behind him, sharp and cruel. Colton's hand twitched toward his hat brim, then stopped. Instead, his voice came low and calm. Maybe, but better men know when they've found enough. For a second, Pike's smirk faltered. Then he tipped his hat and walked away, muttering something about charity cases and soft hearts. Back on the wagon, Hannah stayed silent until they'd left town behind. The prairie stretched wide again, but the air between them was tight. "You didn't have to defend me," she said quietly. Colton's eyes stayed on the road. "No," he said. "I wanted to." That night, after chores, she sat on the porch alone. The stars were enormous, scattered across the dark like spilled silver. Every sound, the crickets, the faint whistle of the wind through the barns, felt amplified. She thought about Pike's laughter, about all the small ways the world had tried to shrink her down, make her invisible. But this land didn't shrink her. It asked her to fill it. The door opened softly behind her. "Can't sleep?" Colton asked. She shook her head. Too many thoughts. He leaned against the porch railing beside her. "I know the feeling. Some nights it's like the ghosts sit heavier than the air." She glanced at him. "You lost someone?" He nodded. "My wife. 5 years ago. Fever took her quick. After that I just worked. Built fences, broke horses, tried not to think. Till you came off that train." Hannah looked down. "You think I was meant to?" "I think sometimes God delays the train on purpose." The words hung between them, soft but charged. Then the sky split open with thunder, not from clouds, but from the distant sound of hooves. Colton's head snapped up. Someone's coming! By the time the riders reached the gate, lanterns flared across the yard. 2 men dismounted, their silhouettes sharp in the firelight. One of them carried a letter. "Mr. Sullivan," the taller one said. "Edmund Pike's attorney. He requests your attendance tomorrow at the saloon. Matter of property dispute." Colton's voice was flat. "Tell him I don't discuss business where men drink." The attorney smiled. "Then he'll bring the business to you." They rode off, laughter fading into the dark. When they were gone, Hannah turned to Colton. "He's trying to push you. Make you look weak," Colton exhaled slowly. "And what do you think I should do?" Her answer was steady. "Don't react. Prepare." Over the next week, she buried herself in the ranch's ledgers. Every entry told a story. Cattle sold, feed bought, taxes paid. But there were inconsistencies, payments that didn't match, interest that shouldn't exist. Someone had been overcharging him for years. One evening, she laid the books on the table. "Colton, do you trust me?" He frowned. "With what?" "Everything." He nodded once. She turned the ledger around and pointed to a column. "Look here. Pike's been siphoning your profits through the supply company. You've been paying his men double for feed. If you bring this to the sheriff, you can file against him. But you'll need proof." He stared at her. "How do you know this?" "I taught bookkeeping in Boston," she said simply. "Numbers never lie." "People do." A slow grin spread across his face. "Remind me never to cross you." The next morning, they rode back into town with the ledgers strapped to the wagon. Pike was waiting outside the saloon, smug as ever. "Come to settle your debts, Sullivan." "Came to collect," Colton said. The crowd stirred. Pike laughed. "You? Collect from me?" "Not me," Colton said. "Her." Hannah stepped down from the wagon, holding the ledger like a weapon. The men watching snickered until she opened it and began to read. Every fraudulent charge, every forged signature, every stolen dollar. Her voice was calm, sharp, impossible to interrupt. When she finished, Pike's smirk was gone. "You calling me a thief?" He snapped. "I'm saying you owe this man 4 years of wages," Hannah said. "And I'm saying I have the proof." The sheriff, drawn by the noise, stepped out of his office. "That true, Pike?" Pike's mouth worked silently. "That ledger's, she forged it." "Funny," Hannah said. "You taught me your handwriting without knowing." The crowd roared. For the first time, the town wasn't laughing at her, they were laughing for her. Pike's face turned red. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "Both of you." Colton moved closer, voice low and final. "You try anything again, and you won't regret it, you won't have time to." That night the ranch felt different. The air lighter, the silence softer. Colton poured coffee for her, the smallest gesture feeling like a promise. "You saved my land today," he said. Hannah smiled faintly. You gave me something worth saving." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time there was no pity, no charity, just quiet admiration. "You don't realize what you've done, do you? You changed how this town sees you, how it sees me." She shook her head. "I didn't come to change anything." "Then you did it by accident," he said. "And that's the best kind of change there is." Outside, the stars burned steady over the plains. The same stars that had watched her cry on that train now watched her laugh over coffee. Her heart no longer afraid of breaking. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Pike's revenge, the town's gossip, the tests yet to come. But for the first time in years, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt home. The flames started just before midnight, a thin red line crawling across the horizon, flickering against the dark like the tongue of a serpent. Hannah woke first. The smell of smoke hit her before the sound reached, dry, bitter, suffocating. "Colton!" she gasped, shaking him from sleep. He was on his feet before his eyes were open, snatching the rifle from beside the door. Outside, the wind carried the unmistakable roar of burning hay. They ran barefoot into the yard. The barn was a wall of fire, orange tongues licking toward the sky. The horses screamed inside, trapped behind the sliding doors, warped from the heat. Colton threw his shoulder against the latch. "Get back!" he shouted, but Hannah didn't move. She grabbed a wet blanket from the trough and wrapped her hands. Together they wrenched the door open, smoke pouring out like a beast unleashed. "Take Belle first," he yelled. She led the terrified mare into the open field, coughing through the haze. Her lungs burned, her throat raw. But she went back again and again, until every horse was free. By the time the fire began to fade, dawn had cracked the sky. The barn was gone, reduced to ash and the black skeleton of beams. Colton knelt in the dirt, covered in soot. Hannah sank beside him, coughing. "Was it Pike?" she asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. A single metal tag lay near the ashes, an embossed plate from one of Pike's supply wagons. Colton's hand clenched around it. "He means to ruin me," he said. "He thinks if he burns enough, I'll sell." Hannah's voice came quiet but certain. "Then we rebuild before he gets the chance." He turned to her, eyes red from smoke and something deeper. "You think I can start over again?" "I think you don't have a choice," she said. "And I think you've got me." That morning, while the town whispered about the fire, Hannah and Colton began again. She organized the ranch hands, cleaned tools, patched what was left. He hauled lumber, silent except for the sound of nails driving into new beams. By nightfall, a frame of a new barn stood rough, half-finished but alive. When the men left, Colton sat on the porch, head in his hands. Hannah brought him coffee and sat beside him. The smell of smoke clung to them both. "You know," she said softly, "in Boston I used to pray for quiet, for safety. I thought that meant comfort, but maybe safety isn't about comfort. Maybe it's about having someone who stands when everything else burns." Colton looked at her, really looked. Her cheeks were streaked with soot, her hair tangled, her arms raw from work. And still, she was the most steadfast thing he'd ever seen. "You didn't have to do all this," he murmured. "I wanted to," she said. "Because I finally belong somewhere." Something shifted in him then, something unspoken but sure. "The same way you recognize rain before it falls." He reached for her hand, rough and blistered like his own. "You saved my life, Hannah Campbell. Not just tonight," she smiled faintly. "Then promise me something. Anything. When Pike comes again, and he will, don't fight him angry. Fight him smart," he nodded slowly. "I'll try." But she saw it, the storm behind his eyes. The part of him that wouldn't rest until justice had a face. The next day, the sheriff arrived to take a statement. He warned them Pike had filed charges, false ones, claiming they had set fire to his feed store the same night. "He's turning the town against you," the sheriff said. "I half believe him already," Colton swore under his breath. "That man's poison." Hannah stepped forward. "What proof does he have?" The sheriff shrugged. "None. But proof don't always matter in a town this small." When he left, Hannah turned to Colton. "Then we'll make them see the truth." "How?" "By building what he tried to destroy," she said. by making this ranch stronger than his lies. And so they did. For weeks they worked without rest. She wrote letters to suppliers in Denver, bargaining better prices. He gathered help from neighboring ranchers who still respected his father's name. Together they rebuilt faster than anyone believed possible. One morning, Sarah rode out from town, eyes wide. "You two are the talk of Silver Creek," she said. "Pike can't stand it. He's losing men, losing respect. But he's not done yet. Be careful." That night, Colton loaded his rifle again. "He'll strike where it hurts most," he said. Hannah looked around, the new barn, the horses, the faint smell of freshly sawn wood. "Then he'll come here." And he did. 3 nights later, she heard movement outside, quiet, practiced. A lantern flickered near the corral. She froze, then slipped out the back door, her heart pounding. 2 shadows moved toward the fence, whispering. One carried a can of kerosene. She didn't scream. She grabbed the iron poker from the stove and stepped into the open. "Drop it," she said. The men turned. One laughed. "Look what we got here." "The fat lady thinks she's the law now." Her voice didn't shake. "I said drop it." They kept coming. One reached for her arm. In that instant, she swung the poker with all the strength of every insult, every laugh, every cruel whisper she'd ever swallowed. It connected with his ribs. He crumpled. The second man lunged, but Colton was already there, charging from the shadows. A single gunshot split the night, echoing off the hills. When the smoke cleared, one man lay bleeding, the other gone into the dark. Hannah stood shaking, tears mixing with soot. "He tried to burn it again," she whispered. Colton holstered the gun and pulled her close. "Not this time," he said. "Not while I'm breathing." They buried the wounded man's weapon by sunrise and sent word to the sheriff. By noon, Pike was under arrest, caught when his own hired man confessed to everything. The town gathered at the courthouse, murmuring as Hannah entered beside Colton. For the first time, the whispers weren't cruel. They were curious, respectful. The sheriff read the confession aloud. Pike's face went pale. "You can't believe her," he shouted. "She's nothing but a—" "Enough!" Colton's voice cut through like a whip. "You wanted to shame her for her size, for her strength, for daring to be seen. But this woman stood in the fire you set and didn't flinch. She's worth 10 of you, Pike." Silence filled the room. Pike's eyes darted around, looking for someone to laugh with him. No one did. The judge slammed his gavel. "Case dismissed, Mr. Pike. You're under arrest for arson and fraud." When it was over, Hannah stepped outside. The air felt lighter, freer. The same wind that once carried gossip now carried her name with something new, respect. Colton joined her on the steps. "You told me to fight smart," he said. "Guess you were right," she smiled. "Guess we both were." He took her hand. "You still think you came too late?" She looked at him, at the town that had once laughed at her, now standing silent in awe. "No," she said softly. "I think I came right on time." The bell at the courthouse rang behind them, bright and clear against the sky, and for the first time, Hannah Campbell felt what she had traveled all those miles to find. Not just love, not just belonging, but the quiet power of a woman who refused to shrink for anyone. The snow came early that year. The first flakes drifted over Sullivan's Reach like feathers, soft and endless. The land that once burned now glittered under white light, quiet and whole. Hannah stood by the porch rail, her breath curling in the cold. The air smelled of pine and smoke from the new chimney, the one Colton had built with his own hands. Inside, laughter spilled out, the kind that only comes when work, pain, and waiting finally turn into peace. Colton stepped out, coat over his shoulders, a bundle in his arms. Their daughter stirred, wrapped in a quilt stitched from Hannah's old dresses. "She's got your eyes," he said. Hannah smiled, touching the baby's cheek. "Then she'll see the world clear." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Hard to believe," he said softly. "A year ago you were stepping off that train, and I thought you were just another story passing through." She looked up at him, her eyes full of that fierce calm he'd fallen in love with. "And now?" "Now I know God delayed that train on purpose." The wind moved through the pasture, whispering across the new barn and the schoolhouse standing beside it. the one Hannah had insisted they build for the ranch children. Bells rang faintly from the little tower she painted red herself. The townsfolk came for Christmas that year. The same people who had once laughed at her now brought bread, gifts, and quiet apologies wrapped in warm smiles. Even the judge, who had once doubted her, came with his wife and said, "Silver Creek owes you both more than words." At dusk, Colton lit the lanterns strung across the fence. Golden light spread across the snow, catching Hannah's hair, her shawl, her proud eyes. The sheriff approached with a grin. "Well, Mrs. Sullivan, you turned this place into a kingdom." Hannah laughed softly. "Not a kingdom, Sheriff. Just a home." As darkness fell, she held her daughter close and looked out over the land, the fences mended, the fields alive, the sky clean and open. For the first time, she didn't see a body that others judged too large, or a woman who came too late. She saw herself as she truly was, unshakable, full of grace, right on time. Colton came up behind her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You cold?" She shook her head. "No, I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." The camera of the heart pulls back, wide, cinematic, showing the family framed by snow, light, and the long road that had carried her here. And then Hannah turns slightly toward the invisible audience, toward us. Her voice, warm and full of life, breaks the wall that separates the story from the world watching it. "If you've watched our story this far," she says, smiling softly, "thank you for believing that love can still arrive late and still be right on time." She glances at Colton, laughter in her eyes. "If you want to see more stories like ours, make sure you subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing how far these stories travel." Colton chuckles, tipping his hat toward the camera. "From Silver Creek, we're wishing you all a good night and reminding you, sometimes the train that's delayed brings you exactly where you're meant to be." The screen fades into soft music. Snow falls across the closing frame. The words appear slowly, glowing in gold letters. "The obese mail order bride arrived a day too late." But love waited.